My mum was a shop assistant and cook at Woolworths. My dad was a civil servant, ex-military from World War II. My dad was a very tolerant person, but like a lot of white working class people, they had tinges of racism. He had a little bit of anti-Semite about him here and there, but nothing very serious. He wouldn't go out of his way to talk hate. Some of my other relatives, my uncles, were a little bit more vocal about it. You know, they might know one black person, but all the rest were the problem. You know, it was that kind of low level of racism, which is very common for white working class people. And I suppose, in terms of race relations, for me, I didn't hate these people. They were my family. You know, I actually adored them. But I grew to question what they were talking about. You know, my father fought in World War II. Like a lot of his generation, he was disillusioned by the end of the war because he ended up on the Eastern European front, shuffling refugees from one place to another. Our postman was a volunteer to fight against Franco in the Civil War, and he ended up at the end of World War II getting sent to Cairo. His parents and generations of dock workers in London, and he was sent to Cairo by the British government to break a docker strike in Egypt. You know, so these are the people that I grew up with, and there was an unevenness about, you know, what they may say and what they'd experienced. And so, you know, I think, and it's important to focus on that today because, you know, the lead up to the last election, you know, I was working in construction in Vermont. Yeah, and a lot of those white working class building workers, who were my friends and colleagues, were listening to Trump and voting for Trump, you know. So, you know, there's as long as there's been racism, there's been a battle of ideas and a battle of words to talk about why it's not in your interest, Mr. White Carpenter, to blame everything on the black people or the Asian people or anyone of colour.
Remember these colours. It's black, white and everything in between, and together we can make a difference. Just by being here today, you've made a difference, you've made a statement.
There was a vibrant music scene in the town of Brighton where I was an apprentice painter and decorator. A good friend of mine, a few of us would go to see bands. You know, we went to see Madness before they'd had a hit at the art school in Brighton. But there was a battle of ideas going on at that time. You know, punk was still a fresh memory. Two-tone was coming into its own. The National Front were winning local elections. And so again, you know, I go back to the battle of ideas and the battle of words. And my good friend, he and I went to see all sorts of bands, from the Piranhas, who were a little funky punk group, to the Stranglers and the Tubes and all those sort of bands, and incidentally the Ramones, you know, when they were still all alive and doing good stuff rather than stupid stuff. But anyway, Ian was a working class lad from a council estate in Brighton, and he was very intelligent, but he was convinced to join the National Front. He was just the sort of person that they were shooting for, the leadership, you know, white, working class. And he was trying to convince me. He lent me a book called The Hoax of the 20th Century, which was essentially a large tome saying that the Holocaust didn't happen. I took it home to read it, and I guess my dad nearly had a kitten when he saw that, because he was actually there fighting for the British Army. Anyway, I read the book. I went to a meeting. A kind of essentially a Rock Against Racism anti-Nazi League meeting. I ran into Ian, who was outside behind the police lines with what they used to call, they laughingly call themselves the master race, but basically a bunch of skinheads with Zeke Island and all the rest of it. I talked to him, had an exchange. He said something about commie scum and you're not going into that meeting. And I said, well, I'm kind of curious and I'll let you know what I think when I come out. I went to the meeting. I believe Paul Foote was the speaker, who was a big name as journalist for the Daily Mirror and all sorts of things. And I went to the desk and signed up there and then after the meeting. And then that led, I was asked if I would keep an eye on Beaky and just basically say that I hadn't joined. And that's what I did. And I would feed the information back to the people at Rock Against Racism until I was invited to have a cup of tea with Ian one lunchtime when I was at tech school, and he introduced me to some people that were responsible for some bombings in France and some vandalism of Jewish cemeteries. So I tried to keep my cool and keep my cover. Left the meeting and went to the nearest telephone box because we didn't have cell phones then. I called my man Roger, and he said, "All right, you're just going to have to lay low, cool the relations with Ian," and that's what I did. And then after a few months, I came out of my Rock Against Racism closet and became a fully fledged activist, organising demonstrations and working to change the minds of the foot soldiers of the National Front, which we did on a few occasions.
Red and blue, Republican, Democrat, we are all been good. Whenever you give up, we more our power and all our souls.
Rock Against Racism Vermont was formed a couple of years ago in the lead up to the last election in this country between Trump and Biden. A group of us in southern Vermont were sitting around and talking, and actually my now wife Jen said, you know, we were all saying how awful everything was. It was Jen that said, well, we need something like Rock Against Racism from the 70s, and so we formed Rock Against Racism Vermont, honouring the tradition of the UK Rock Against Racism. The most recent event we did in Brattleboro at it's an indoor skate park, but we did it in a parking lot. That was a big success. It was a very noisy gig, lots of people came along, very skateboardy, punky scene, but hey, it just felt like 40 years ago with slightly different clothing, you know. But and then now we're building for a harvest festival at a place called Adams Farm, which is on Higley Hill Road in Wilmington. We've got 4 bands, including Don't Leave and Zara Boday's big band. That's happening this weekend on Sunday, the 25th, from noon till 5. And we've managed to combine all manner of things, including a bouncy castle, a beer tent, food vendors, a tattoo artist, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So it's going to be a lot of fun, and it's open to all ages and all genders, races and identities, you name it. We will welcome you with open arms. We hope to do gigs around the Greenfield, Brattleboro, Turners Falls. Get in touch with us. If you've got an idea for an event, we'll be totally in support of you. We'll send you someone to speak about it, and we don't care whether it's 25 people or 250 or 2,500. There'll be someone there to speak on behalf of Rock Against Racism Vermont for you. So that's us offering a hand out to you, so that if we all stand together, then we can make a difference.
Hey, what's up, bro? I'm up in Vermont right now painting a piano.